But actually, before we even do that, I just have to say a little disclaimer, which is, in my opinion, I think that the present conflict here is not going to be resolved. Now, that's a bit of a bummer for certain people who think that, there might be peace and people sing Kumbaya at some point. Yeah, it's probably not going to happen. The reason it's probably not going to happen with regard to Israel and Gaza is because it's very, very, very deeply entrenched. So in 1948, you had the so-called Nakba. So this is the expulsion of many Palestinian Arabs from the land which is now Israel. Now, if you look at the West Bank, about a third of its population are the descendants of those who were expelled during the Nakba. However, when you look at Gaza, the figure is 80%. So 80% of the population of Gaza is the descendants of people who were expelled from Israel. So these are people who still hold the keys to their ancestral homeland, and these people here, no matter what, are never going to support a two-state solution. This is part of the reason why Hamas is so strong in Gaza as opposed to in West Bank, because these people have a vested interest in not only just ending occupation, which they see as step one, but actually want to go further than that and actually reverse the existence of the state of Israel, right? They want to undo the state of Israel. They want to, at bare minimum, have the Palestinians be in control of that land. The Jews can either stay or the Jews can flee to other countries, etc., etc. But this is the opinion of the majority of Palestinians that, yes, end occupation, that's step one. Step two is regaining all the historical land of Palestine from the river to the sea. That is the end goal. So Israel, knowing this and understanding this, has looked at the events of October 7th and had looked at multiple other events which has taken place in the last few decades. And they understand that actually, as bad as it is, they kind of, regardless of international law, regardless of whether they want to, they have to occupy Palestine. It sounds really horrible to say, but just in blunt strategic terms, they have to. Now, for those who don't know the geography of Israel, about 50% of the total territory of Israel is made up of the Beersheba sub-district. This is basically where the Negev desert is. This is in the south of the country. Hardly anyone lives here. The vast majority of the Israeli population is along the so-called Israeli coastal plain. This is where 57% of Israel's total population lives, and this is where about 70% of Israeli Jews live. So this is Israel's heartland, and at its narrowest point, it's just 15 kilometers from West Bank to the Mediterranean Sea. So they're fully aware that if you had a similar attack as you had on October 7th, from not just Gaza, but from the West Bank, this would cut Israel in two. This would be a huge risk to their heartland, and therefore they cannot do anything except continue the occupation, because for strategic reasons, they cannot trust Palestine actually being a fully sovereign and independent country. Because if Hamas, with a fraction of the resources and manpower that a united Palestinian state would have, if they were able to do what they did on October 7th, if you had a fully independent Palestine, they would be able to do even more than that. And Israel will never allow that to happen to them. So as bad as it is, the occupation is still going to continue. And actually, I think it's going to be even worse. I think there's going to be basically a reversal of what happened in 2005. So for those who don't know, in 2005, Israel withdrew all the troops from Gaza and it withdrew 8,000 settlers. I think that what's going to happen after this war is that Israel is going to reoccupy Gaza, and the settlers are going to come back, and they're going to come back in even greater numbers, and the Palestinian population will be restricted just to their major population centers, but the Israeli settlers, they will be moved into all the other places. So that's my prediction of how this current conflict is going to end, and it's not very nice at all. Regardless of what perspective you have, whether you're pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian, it's not an ideal situation I think everyone could agree with. However, what I would say is that even if that was the case, I would then stop supporting Israel, but there's almost nothing which would endear me to support Palestine. Now, the reason I say this is because if you look at the history of the Jews and the Palestinians, there's actually quite a lot of overlap. Both sides have been exiled, they've been occupied, they've been humiliated, they've been persecuted, and actually there has been a large degree of ethnic cleansing. Regardless of whether one wants to admit it or not, there has been a great deal of ethnic cleansing. For one group, a little bit more, let's just say, but certainly for the other group, you could also argue that definitely. And there's always the fear that there could be more ethnic cleansing for both sides. However, what I would say is, in terms of on an ethical basis, how the Jews have conducted themselves after 2,000 years of being in exile compared to how the Palestinians have survived after 75 years, it does not even pale in comparison. In 2,000 years of pogroms, of expulsions, of the Holocaust, etc., you will never find an example of Jews coming out of the ghetto, coming out of the shtetl, coming out of even the concentration camp, and committing the kind of heinous crimes which we have seen with Palestinian cause. I'm not saying all Palestinians, but I'm saying the Palestinian cause, and many people there end up supporting the people who do these acts. You will never find people going and massacring innocents. You will never find people targeting school buses and blowing themselves up. You will never find suicide bombing. You will never find people taking hostage, nothing, right? You will never find an example which is similar to this. And actually, I would argue throughout the examples of those people who are oppressed and people who have been the victims of settler colonialism, wherever that has been, whether you look at the Irish, whether you look at the Algerians, whether you look at the Maori, whether you look at the Aborigines, the American Indians, the South Africans, no matter where you look, you will not find an example of the victims of settler colonialism resisting in this manner. Yes, those who are the victims of it have every right to resist. And I myself, if I was a Palestinian, would resist Israeli occupation 100%. However, there is nothing that would make me commit the kind of heinous crimes which many people on the Palestinian side have committed against the Israelis, and they started just 75 years. And actually, their conduct in the last 100 years, because as we covered in our previous videos, this conflict here between the Jews and the Arabs, this actually started by the Arabs, right? If you look back at 1920, this is where the conflict actually begins. And this is at a point where the Jews are so much in the minority, there's hardly any immigration at all. So you can't even say that, oh, well, they're taking over land, etc., etc. You can see how right from the beginning, there was a distrust and there was a hatred towards these people. So there's nothing in the last 100 years which would endear me to supporting Palestine. I might stop supporting Israel, and actually I really am very skeptical and very critical of what Netanyahu and the religious right within Israel are doing. I don't think that how they've conducted this war in any way has been helpful to Israel. I think it has really hurt the cause of Israel because of how they conducted it and how they purposely been, targeting civilians as much as they say that are not. They've not taken the proper care to actually minimize civilian losses in this conflict. But even still, there's nothing then that would make me go, yes, I am in support of Palestine. I think there should be a two-state solution. And actually the borders of that, I think that you could make a very strong argument that borders of Palestine should be even greater. If both sides could actually lay down their arms and actually, support the other side and actually say, right, okay, these are the borders, we're not shifting it past this point. Yeah, cool. Of course, you could have Palestine be much larger than it currently is. You could have Israel be much smaller than it currently is. But you cannot have a two-state solution if one side does not respect the existence of the other. And actually, as I've said, the majority of Palestinians ending occupation is step one. Step two is trying to destroy the state of Israel and to reclaim that land. So I think with that being the case, there is no negotiation. And unfortunately, because there's no negotiation, whether we like it or not, and I certainly don't like it, the occupation is a logical conclusion that comes out of that, because Israel has no choice but to do that. Regardless of whatever we think of that, regardless of whether the UN wants to sanction Israel, regardless of whether even Europe and like the United States want to sanction Israel, Israel is going to continue doing this because it has no choice other than to do this.